I think we're almost there. All right. Okay. And we're live. Guys, thank you very much for everybody that's here joining us live today and everybody that's going to watch us later as well. We have a very interesting episode for you today because we have a very interesting event coming up very soon. It's on the 21st of this month, and it's called the National Conference on Equal Rights for Hindus. But before we actually talk about the conference, let me just welcome our guests today. So I'm joined by Ratiji, Rituji, and Surenji. You guys, welcome.
Namaste. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
No, absolutely, it's a pleasure. Now, before we get into what the event is, it's what's interesting about it, and we were talking about it very briefly offline as well, is I think the reaction of a certain group of people when you mention a phrase like this, a conference for equal rights for Hindus in India. And I was telling you about a story about when I told one of my friends here, they were like, "Oh, you're 80% of the population. What do you need to worry about? What do you need equal rights for?" And so on and so forth. But when you actually sit down and maybe look at the Constitution, when you sit down and go through certain provisions of the Constitution, certain freedoms that are guaranteed to every Indian under the Constitution, those freedoms are not necessarily guaranteed to Hindus and Hindu temples and Hindu educational organizations under the Constitution as well. So the phrase that always sticks with me when I look at this conference is constitutionally sanctioned inequality. And I want to get you guys sort of opinion on what your reaction is, what the people's reaction has been once you brought this out to them. So Ratiji, let me get started with you. Like, what's the reaction that people have shown to the event?
Actually, one of the very surprising things that I kept hearing is that the Constitution is perfect. There's nothing wrong with the Constitution.
Right.
It is the understanding of the judiciary that is wrong.
Okay.
Or, that the words have been misconstrued and misused. Now, while it may be true to a certain extent that the Constitution makers themselves did not prepare or use the word secularism or minority religion or majority religion in the Constitution, the fact remains that these were added later. Now, obviously, they were added with some mischief in mind is what we have to understand. And that is why it became very easy to misuse these terms at a later date by the politicians or by the judiciary or by whoever has misused it. For example, the people who come to convert us.
Yeah.
Now, this misunderstanding or this leeway that people give that, these words are not to be misunderstood in the Constitution, it has to be taken in the right spirit, is very nice to speak about. But unless they are reinforced with correct clauses, it will still work only against the Hindus and not for the Hindus.
Yeah, that's fair. And Rituji, what's your experience been after the event was announced? Oh, I think you might be on mute again.
Okay. So I want to say something that before I share experience of other people, I want to share my own experience. Because it's very important how we, got aware about this, our own awareness on this. So it's about just 2 years back that, I actually saw a pamphlet run by Swarajya that, Hindus do not control their own temples. There is a state interference. And it was a whole chart kind of a thing with tick, cross. And I was very shocked to see that what is this, how is it that the minority religions in India are able to control their own religious places, but Hindus are not given anything. Forget given anything, the hundi money which is collected for the temples is also not used for the development of Hindu society, but the state governments are taking over that money. Yeah. So it's then when, after that we research, study, and then realize that the whole negative gangotri of this bias actually is running from the misinterpretation of the constitution over the years, because somewhere our the people who framed our constitution did not realize that the people in future would not withhold the spirit of the constitution in the right way.
Yeah.
So definitely when I talk to people and when I'm announcing, so of course, as your reaction, I also get a similar reaction. Whoa, what is this Hindu? Why this Hindu? So I have to actually tell them, because it is the Hindus which are getting discriminated, not anybody else. And then of course I go ahead, tell them the example, but yes, there is a positive response once people understand that
Right.
what is the basic issue. They do want that, yes. So my only question to the parents, and the people who are the urban people is, do you want your children to learn Dharm Shastras? Do you want your children to learn Sanskrit? Do you want your children to know about their ancient civilization? And trust me, the answers are phenomenal. I get 99% yes answers. Yes.
Oh, that's
So I
great.
said, if you want this, then this conference makes a very big difference.
Right. No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And Suren, I want to come to you because the first topic I sort of want to discuss, I think, relates to you, or you will be talking about that during the conference as well. And one of them, I believe, is the Citizenship Act, and calling for the amendments to the Citizenship Act, because if we really look at Hindus or Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains that are being persecuted across the globe, and where if they're having problems in places around the world that are not India, they really have nowhere else to go. If you're if you're part of one of these four dharmic cultures, you have nowhere else to go if you run into a problem. If you run into a problem in that country, you can't go anywhere else. Whereas if you're a Muslim, there are places you have options. If you're a Christian, you have options. But if you're a Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, or Jain, you are completely out of options. So I think, calling for a change in the Citizenship Amendment Act to sort of declare, and I've been speaking about this on my show as well, to declare India the natural homeland of these four cultures. I think it's a big step, and I think it's an important step. But I want to come to you and ask you that, the BJP government also came up with a citizenship amendment bill. And even that bill, there was a couple of issues there with that bill as well that I think it have been pointed out in the manifesto. So if you could just tell us a little bit about maybe some of the problems with the bill that the BJP government brought in, and how you would, maybe create a bill that made more sense in the long term.
So this topic is something we are doing in the day before the conference.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll go. There are a couple of fundamental philosophical points here. As a civilizational state, India is a civilizational state. We are not an ethnic state. We are not a religious state. We are not a linguistic state. We are not based on language or ethnicity or religion. We are based on the civilization and the civilizational values. And civilizational values are carried in each individual who's part of that civilization. So if you have a Hindu in Trinidad, or if you have a Hindu in Malaysia, or if you have a Hindu in Kenya or Uganda, who have been there, who have either migrated there or who have naturally adopted the Hindu religion and way of life, they are carriers of the civilization, and we have a responsibility. As a nation, we have a responsibility to these people. Yeah. I think a lot of people in the lawmaking fraternity and in the judiciary instinctively get that. But the questions, the restrictions they pose on themselves are, we must have only the persecuted minorities from the subcontinent.
Yeah.
Right? That's a restriction that we need not put on ourselves. And then if you open it up and say that you should have persecuted minorities anywhere, then you essentially change yourself into what we in the South called a Dharma Chatram. It's something like, Dharamshala. Just anybody can just come in here and claim ownership over resources. Yeah. We cannot be that way. We have certain obligation to the people who already live here.
Yeah.
So that's why we said that there are two restrictions we have to make. We'll have to make it a person who belongs to any of the Indic faiths or the faiths that originated here. Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism, and specifically to Buddhism, where they are a persecuted minority.
Yeah.
If you're a Tibetan Buddhist, India is a, we can offer you shelter because you are a persecuted minority. But on the other hand, if you're a Buddhist in Sri Lanka, there is no obligation on us to offer you citizenship because you're not part of a persecuted minority. And why we restricted to Christians and why we restricted to only these faiths is because of the civilizational responsibility, whereas people of other faiths have other options. There are other states which are avowedly Christian, which are Muslim in character, and which, as a Muslim state or as a Christian state, have a responsibility to help out Muslims or Christians wherever they are targets of discrimination. So that's been our reasoning behind the way we structure this bill. Of course, the bill itself is structured in a lot of very legal language, but I'm just trying to make it, just conversational so that we can all have a conversation, easy conversation around it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, every time we have this conversation, people step on eggshells a little bit because they're like, oh, how, because the immediate accusation is that, oh, are you, why are Hindus immediately, or Buddhists or Sikhs or Jains that are being persecuted across the globe? How do they immediately get to come to India, and why not Muslims and why not Sikhs? And I think it's high time now that India declares itself, or India at least makes the effort to say that we, like you said there, Suren, I think you said it perfectly, that we have a civilizational responsibility. We have a civilizational responsibility to these people. We have to make sure that if there were 50 other Hindu countries that could have taken these people in, fine, then India doesn't need to worry about it as much. But it's not. This is the only home that they have. If they are persecuted somewhere else, this is the only place that they can come and truly feel safe. So I think it doesn't make it a religiously bigoted statement to say that India is the civilizational home for all these persecuted dharmic cultures across the globe. I think that's a very good point. The other thing that I wanted to come to, and this is, I believe, going to be part of the main forum and the main conference as well, is the problem of fraudulent conversions, because that's a menace that's been, becoming bigger and bigger, because we've been noticing in 2017, for example, there was a very interesting statistic where I think 3 of the top 4 NGOs that received the most amount of foreign funding were missionary evangelical NGOs. That's top 3. So that there is a significant effort from overseas, from these evangelical groups that are planning to come to India and carry out conversion activities. Now, the Constitution of India does provide people the basic freedom or the basic right to be able to, practice and propagate their religion. But I think what becomes very interesting in this definition is the definition of the word propagate, right, Rituji? Is what do we mean when we say propagate? Because propagate can mean I am just going up to someone and telling them about the tenets of my culture, and if they like it, great. If they don't like it, great. I move on. That's propagate. Propagate can also be I'm going to dress up in saffron clothes. I'm going to put a little tika on my head, and I'm going to have a shikha, and I'm going to say Jesus is actually the 11th avatar of Vishnu or whatever. And this is not a church. Don't worry. This is not a church. This is a mandir. And it's the 5th Veda. And somebody who's not maybe educated, somebody who's not maybe literate is going to be like, oh, everything's hunky-dory. That's propagate also. So I think one big challenge comes in how we define the word propagate, right? Sorry, your voice, your volume cut off again.
She went on mute again.
There we are.
No, sorry about that. Yeah,
no
there I am. So, definitely, Shambhav, this word propagate in our constitution is the real menace that we are facing today. Because again, the interpretation by judiciary, by the conversion mafia has been to their own benefit. And somehow, our judiciary has also favored them.
Yeah.
In fact, as you were saying today morning only, I tweeted about a video which was a shocker for me. I mean, I've never seen anything like that ever before in my life, that in a church in Mahasena in Gujarat, the villagers, it's a church and it has an Om symbol.
Wow.
It has an Om symbol, exactly. And then as you enter, you have these priests who are absolutely dressed up, the Hindu priests, saffron robes, rudraksha malas. They have the jata, and they are singing the Vishnu, the Jesus Aarti, the Sanskrit Aarti. This is in Sanskrit. I mean, nothing can be more choking, nauseating, and bigger lechery than this. That how we are fooling in the name of the word propagation, our own people. I mean, you have to have a look at that video to see that what exactly I'm talking about. Then the other thing that I again read today was, about this, and how the media goes gaga over, how in this particular village in India, Hindus, Christians are living very nicely and sweetly. Where Hindus guard the Christian church, and the Christian church is slowly and smartly, quietly encroaching the temple land, and Hindus are completely unaware about it. So in behind this word propagate, there is so much of debauchery going on, and it has to stop.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you talk about, when they say, oh, look how nicely all of these people are living together. There's a great book by Christoph von Führer-Heimendorf. He did a study of the tribal populations of northeastern India, and he tried to find the effect that Christian missionaries and Christian conversion had on those tribal societies. And the effect was quite drastic, because he noticed that the people that had converted became very, very hostile towards the people that had not converted, and started saying that these people are not part of our culture, these people are not part of our tribe, and started driving these people out. And so these kinds of conversions, what people do not realize is that these kinds of conversions create massive rifts within society, because you've been under this conversion, you've been taught to behave a certain way, you've been taught to think a certain way, and people that do not follow your religion, you've been taught to think of them a certain way as well. So the way these societies, these tribal societies in the Northeast were destroyed, is a very good sample size of what is possible in the rest of India, I believe, as well. And obviously there are no such laws dealing with fraudulent conversions in India, but all across country. But certain states have had, Ratiji, their own kind of they've created their own regional laws, state laws. I think Odisha is one example, and Madhya Pradesh is another one as well, where they've created these regional laws. But there are some issues with those laws as well, where those laws maybe don't tackle the issue as effectively. So I don't know if you know much about those laws, or what your experience has been in looking at those laws and what the shortcomings there have been.
See, I'd like to say one thing, that it's not enough to just have the law. You need to also see to it that it's implemented properly.
Yes.
Now, for example, you talked about Odisha. Now, okay, there may be a law for stopping conversion, or for reducing conversion, or whatever you want to call it. But the fact remains that just last week or so, a 900-year-old mutt was broken down because the state government wanted it to be done. Yeah. Now, what do you do in such a case? You are talking about a law against conversion. People come there to say they are doing faith healing. And the people who are even coming there to attend these sessions, they do not even realize that it is not faith healing, but conversion that is going on. Yeah. Ritu gave the example of that aarti going on, and all the puja being done in a Hindu style. Let us see what's happening even with our songs, our classical music. Yeah. Today they are telling that Bharatnatyam and classical music, in South India and all, that also should be talking about Jesus Christ and all that. What is all that? It is an indirect form of conversion also, isn't it?
Yes.
See, it is not necessary that everything is just written down in black and white. Okay, it is not like as if, you are just telling that, okay, you go to church 5 times and that's how you're converted. No. Today, what is happening is mental conversion and intellectual conversion via your traditions being appropriated by another religion. Now, that is something for which laws have not yet been formed.
Yeah.
And we need to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That is what is required.
Yeah, you're on mute again, Ritu.
So
There we
just
are.
to add to Rati, so the conversion law that we are talking about, that the state governments have been coming, are so weak that there are so many lacunae in that it is very difficult to implement them and stop this conversion mafia. Till the time we do not have these amendments coming up in the Constitution in Article 25, 1 and 2, we actually cannot have a robust conversion law in India.
Yeah.
And while we're talking conversions, I think we also must discuss the propagation of madrasas in India, because it's just not, the invasion is just not one side, but there is an invasion happening from the other side also. And we as a civilization index are getting completely sandwiched
In the
in
middle.
between. So it's the mafias are operating both ways, and both needs to be discussed here.
Yeah. And Suren, how do we, so if we're looking at effective laws, like we've just discussed earlier, that laws can be made, but the question is, like as Rati said, the question is, how effective are they going to be? So how do you suppose we get around to making laws in this way that are effective but do not also cramp on certain fundamental freedoms that are granted to people under preaching their own religion?
So that the laws that were made so far were not effective, mainly because they put a clamp on. They specifically said that we will clamp down on coercive conversion.
Okay.
Now, how the mode and manner by which the conversion is done is something that they never address, but they say that it should not be coerced. And coerced is a matter of intent.
Yeah.
There must have been intent on the person, part of the people or the organization which was converting, and there must have been either some financial or some kind of benefit or some kind of threat or some kind of cheating that must have happened for the person to have got converted. How would you prove that? That becomes very difficult to prove. You have to have the person. These laws had things like people had to come and just sign an affidavit claiming that they had converted of their own free accord, which was just a paper that they had to sign. Now what we're talking about is, we are saying that we want to have safeguards against organized conversion, organized or organizations putting in place a workforce for the specific purpose of converting people with incentives based on the number of people converted, etc. So very often if you do a little bit of if you just kind of peel back the covers and look under the hood, so to speak, you will see that a lot of these people actually claim that they will claim conversion rates, success rates, saying that we converted so many number of people into whatever we were supposed to convert them into. Yep. And they're used as calling cards and sales pitches. And you can actually see videos. I can probably show certain videos which people, the same way that salesmen come to the US to sell business services or IT services, these people come here to sell their conversion services. They say that I have been able to do A, B, C, D, as opposed to this kind of approach which didn't work so well. And they come and do this as a sales pitch. They give sales pitch to people in the West, in the US and Europe. So that's the law that we want to bring in would stop this kind of thing happening.
Yeah. Again, I think. Sorry, Rati,
if I may just add, I just want to add one thing. One conversion which very few people talk about is how business people are converted by telling them that you can get further businesses abroad, or you can study abroad, or you can get contacts abroad if you were belonging to a certain religion. This has actually become one of the most difficult things to even find out and to stop from happening.
Yeah.
Now this kind, it's slowly eating it into the fabric of our country in many ways. Yeah. The main person gets converted, then his staff gets converted. Now, all these things which are happening, really the government has to take a look at this in a more deeper manner, more serious manner, and work on it.
Yeah. Another, I think, before I move on to another topic, let me just acknowledge a couple of super chats on YouTube. Right is always right. Thank you. Shiva Patnayak, thank you very much. Praya Sharma and Punamabi, thank you for the super chats. I appreciate it. There's now we come to another one that's been a very bone of contention over the past few years, particularly because it was, associated with such a, I think, such a contentious issue, and that was the issue of essential practice. That's an issue that came up quite a bit over the last couple of years, particularly associated with the problem in Sabrimala, and how the courts behaved in that during that whole time was very telling. And I think that highlights the need for a discussion on this issue, and that highlights the need for a conference like the one that is being organized. Because when they were discussing Sabrimala, when the Sabrimala went to the courts, how courts talked about Sabrimala was very telling. They said, okay, what is the essential practice? Is what is going on in Sabrimala part of the essential practice of Hinduism? And that coming from a court of India is a very interesting statement, because if anyone knows anything about Hinduism, is what it's known for really is its diversity. Like, I'll give you an example. I said this earlier as well. Like, I'm from Bihar, and in Bihar, Chhat is an essential practice. Everybody celebrates Chhat. Chhat is a major festival, and Biharis spend a lot of time on it. But for a Punjabi Hindu, that's not an essential practice. For a Kannadiga Hindu, that is not an essential practice. So there might be something in Karnataka that people do that is not an essential practice in Bihar for Bihari Hindus. So that's a very strange thing to ask for, to say that what is one essential practice that needs to apply in every little corner of Hindu culture in India. That becomes a very interesting issue as well, because the way courts are looking at Hindu practices is the way courts you'd look at like an Abrahamic practice. That it's very easy to define essential practices in Abrahamic religions, isn't it, Ritu? It's very easy to define essential practices in Islam and Christianity, but it's not so cut and dried in Hindu culture. So that figuring that out within the constitution and having the courts actually look at the nuance in that issue about essential practices vary from place to place is an important next step to cross, right?
Very right. Actually, I would want Surenji to speak about how Article 25(2)(b), where it says that, see what happens. Article 25(2)(b) says that provides for social welfare and reform. Now, these two words, social welfare and reform, in Article 25 have been used by our judiciary, by our courts and judges to interfere in Hindu traditional practices. I mean, Sabrimala is of course one case. There is another case where Supreme Court is directing the Ujjain Mahakal temple how much Charnamat should be used on the Shivling. And my God, I mean, what is this? And from where all this is coming? This is coming exactly from the interpretation of Article 25(2)(b), where it says social welfare and reform. And actually, Surenji here would be the right person to talk and take this conversation further.
All right, Surenji.
Thanks, Ritu. So the place of the essential reason why Article 25(2)(b) was placed in there is because of certain practices which were discriminatory. For example, certain communities, only certain temples were restricted to certain communities. Certain temples were not restricted to certain communities. So there's a difference, right? There are community-based temples which are specific to that community. The priests can be from that community. The worshippers are mainly from that community. And there are general temples which are for public use by all Hindus. And there were discriminatory practices in the earlier part of the 20th century which needed to go. And so the core and the Constituent Assembly specifically inserted this clause in order to prevent against discrimination. But then where we kind of lost our way was in two phrases. One is essential practice and one is religious denomination. Right? A religious denomination, for us, it's a sampradaya. Right? A sampradaya is something that can be specific to a philosophical school like the Madhva school or the Advaita school. It could be a denomination with a specific set of beliefs or specific philosophical practice or certain practices which you follow. That could be a sampradaya. On the other hand, a sampradaya could be the set of faith, practices, and rituals followed in, for example, Sabarimala. Sabarimala is one single temple to the deity Ayyappan. Ayyappan temples are there all over the country and all over South India. And there is this one specific temple where there is a specific means of carrying out the pilgrimage, and it is open to all Hindus. In fact, open even to non-Hindus. I mean, even non-Hindus can make the pilgrimage. There's no restriction on them, but provided they have to follow certain rules. Now, how, if you take the example, if you take, for example, the Christian, the Baptists or the Presbyterians, they are a denomination. If you're a Presbyterian, you're a Presbyterian. You cannot be a Catholic. Right. You cannot be a Baptist. You can only be a Presbyterian. And if you're a Presbyterian, there is a certain head of the church and there are certain practices that you are essential practice, which are essential for you to be considered a Presbyterian. Yeah. I can be a Kayasth from Uttar Pradesh, and for the purpose of the Sabarimala Sampradaya, if I'm a devotee, I just need to follow the practices of Sabarimala. Yeah. I can follow any other practices that I feel which is right. I can be a Punjabi Baniya, I can be a Kayas, I can be somebody from Naga from Nagaland. But if I'm going to Sabarimala and if I want to worship there is a practice. So this is if you take an essential practice test and apply it to a special case, it's like taking a generic rule and trying to apply it to a special case, then the essential practice fails, test fails. Essentially the test fails, and the test would fail for nearly 70-80% of the practices that our temples and our mutts and our religious institutions follow. So that's what we want to do, is to bringing the appropriate safeguard to ensure that anything that is ancient, which is established, which may not be written down, but it is just oral, which is established and which is part of tradition and which doesn't harm anybody. Yeah. We do not want the state to interfere there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair claim as well. And it sort of ties into another problem another major problem that we were talking about offline as well, and is about, temples being able to manage their affairs. And we were discussing earlier, Ratiji, offline as well, that how temples, at least, from my experience, I can give you my experience, is that in Bihar, in my home village, there, there's a temple there in the middle of the village where whenever it's Holi, in Holi, we call that season Phagua. So during Phagua, everybody gets together in the village and they sing songs about Phagua, and it's a very spiritual experience. Same about Dashehra. During Dashehra, people will collect in the village, people will sing songs, and Diwali is the same. So it's, in a way, a temple, really in Indian culture, in my experience, is the sort of heart and soul of a village in rural India. Right.
Absolutely.
And when you take away the right of the temple to do what it wishes with the funds that it generates, you're not generating the funds for the temple. The temple is generating the funds on its own. But the government says, okay, you can generate your funds on its own, but I will tell you what to do with it. Which again does not apply to other communities. It does not apply to the Islamic community, does not apply to the Christian community. It only applies to the Hindu community. And when you take away that aspect of independence from the temples, then you take something really away from what we already discussed. It can be a real heart and soul of a village in India, right? Oh, is everyone here? Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
Yeah. When we're talking about temples, I wanted to say one thing. Yeah. That the temple, which was that unit, the most important unit of a whole community, has now become a center to collect money. Yeah. When people stand there and say, oh, tumhare Hindu temples aise hain, that even to get darshan, you got to pay. It hurts.
Yeah.
It is not the temple or the temple authorities who had initially decided that to stand in that queue, you have to pay 100 rupees or 500 rupees for darshan. All these practices came up when the government took over the temples, or when certain other parties took over the temples and started asking for money for every single thing that is to be done over there. Whether you want to do a Deeparatna, whether you want to stand in the queue and get a quicker darshan, whether you want to do a Kalyanotsav, for everything you've got to pay.
Yeah.
That is not how it was earlier. First thing is that. Second thing I want to say is that our temples were actually the center point for a lot of activities. And by activities, I mean those with relation to, talking about or teaching about your Vedas, your Shastras, to even teaching people what to eat in which season, to even looking after those cows and cattle which had been abandoned because they were not giving milk anymore, to looking after all the, helping the old people in the villages by giving them bhandaras, by having bhandaras and everything, feeding people for free without expecting anything in return.
Yeah.
And also, in the way of having shops around these temples, so that way giving a livelihood to a lot of people. I want to say one thing, that it is a misconception that only, certain communities were allowed inside temples and all. It's a very wrong misconception, because even that person who plays the dole, he also was allowed inside the temple.
Yeah.
I mean, you had different sections of societies helping or in the temple activities throughout the year. It was not like as if, it's being portrayed that only one community benefited, and that is why the government had to take over the administration. This is a very false notion that has been told to everybody, and people have started believing in it also.
Yeah.
It was definitely not like that. The bhandaras that were there were not for only one community. All communities participated. Everybody enjoyed the meals. Okay. Same way, the shops. Now, when, one thing is, you are having people in service from different communities or from different religions being allowed to work in a Indian temple, in a Hindu temple. Even the businesses are now being appropriated by people of other religions.
Yep.
The shops outside the temples, they are being given to people from other religions. So if you are going to obfuscate everybody from earning, a Hindu from earning, or from even getting darshan properly in a temple, what are you leaving the temple there for?
Yeah.
It's become a business commodity, or what is it that you have made it out to be? This is something that people need to understand, how the temples have been misused to bring in income for the government, the state governments.
That's true.
And this
as well.
has to stop.
Yeah, that's very right. And because the government is taking the money from the temples, and the temples don't have the right to be able to manage their affairs themselves. Another problem that you were talking about, Ritu, earlier, I think you alluded to it briefly, which was, the encroachment from the churches and the Waqf board. And this was a question I think I got from my Patreon group as well, from Subodh Malia, who was asking on the Patreon WhatsApp group that, discuss the land encroachment that happens under these circumstances, where because the temples do not have the money to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to maintain themselves, it's often these large churches and these large Waqf board that have no problems with financial strength. They get a lot of money from overseas, and they're able to just buy up land. The government either is a willing participant or is completely oblivious to the way these organizations are buying up land. And we've reached a position where I believe the church is the second biggest owner of land after, I think, the government or something like that.
Yes.
So and that's a serious issue, right?
Yes.
Very serious. Shamba, there are so many plethora of problems here, which are coming from our temple, that we are not able to manage our own temples. Few months back, I met T.R. Rameshi, who's a lawyer who works for Freedom of Temples from Tamil Nadu, and I generally asked him. I said, I really want to understand what is the kind of temple economy we are looking at if we were to manage our own temples, because this is very important for every viewer here to understand that what is the temple economy. So he told me, if we are to look at the hundi money collection per year, if we are to look at the land that our temples have all across India, the temple economy is somewhere between 4,000 crore to 5,000 crore. Now,
Wow.
just look at this figure. This is where the game is. This is where everything is centered around. Now, imagine the kind of development the Hindu society will go through if this money is used for teaching Vedas, for teaching Shastras, for teaching running Vedic institutes, for running Sanskrit institutes. There will be a phenomenal growth of dharmic civilization in India, just like the ancient times. Now, instead, what exactly is happening? We'll give an example from Karnataka, when the Congress government was in power there. The hundi money which was being collected from the Karnataka temples, where was it going? It was going into renovation of churches and masjids. Now, I really want to ask every secular Indian, how fair is this?
Yeah.
Is it fair? That is one question. Then we have judiciary interfering with our rituals. With our dahi handis, what should be the height of our dahi handi, how we should celebrate our temples, how we should what amount of charnamat we should put on our this thing, whether the women should get into the temple or not get into the temple. Our Shankracharyas, who are the masters, have no role to play here. Our judges are the masters of everything. That is another problem that we are facing here.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we come to the encroachment part. And also, when I come to the encroachment part, I want to discuss the conversion mafias inroads that it has made. I'm sure all of you must have read about this case where a Madras High Court judge actually gave a judgment that the church priest, there is a lot of sexual abuse against women going on in the church, and the whole mafia got the judge only removed and transferred from there. Now, just look at this, what we are fighting and where we are leading to. So these questions our society must understand and realize what we are up against.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead, Surenji.
Yeah. So where we are coming from is that, if you want members of your family to stay in your house and not go to somebody else's house, which is attractive, first you have to make your house clean and attractive. So if you walk into a temple, it must be a clean place.
Yeah.
You should not have people asking you for money. And the priest should not be a person who's begging you for money or, behaving in a greedy fashion. He should be a person who has his basic, he need not be a rich guy. He need not be a rich person. He must be kept in a fashion that his basic needs are met so that he doesn't have to beg or, indulge in malpractice for money. Then your religious institutions, your mosques and your temples, they must be able to provide you education. They must be able to provide you both education as run schools or, give cheap education for people from the lower economic strata. They must be able to share information about our dharmic granth and about our traditional values and our traditional. They should be able to be patrons of traditional arts, crafts, and also provide healthcare. There are so many wonderful things that are, if run properly.
Yeah.
As Rituji was saying, it's like 4,000 crores to 6,000 crores a year worth of money from the temples, 30,000 temples, which are in just one state alone.
Yeah.
And imagine if we can generate, if that's the kind of wealth they generate, and if it can be channelized to the right kind of things that we can do, public health centers, schools, hospitals, colleges, Shastra Patshalas, Shastri classes, music, traditional dance, it would be a complete revitalization of our country, civilizationally. So that's, and for that, we need to be able to say that the state should not have the right to univocally take over religious institutions, and be able to put in place a framework for the community to be able to take over and manage their institutions themselves.
Yeah, that's fair. Let me ask you, Surenji, as well, that, I suppose playing devil's advocate, the one question that would be there is, how to ensure that if the temples do get the right back to manage their own affairs, how to ensure that there isn't corruption then, because there's corruption now, obviously, because the state controls it, so it's used for all kinds of nefarious purposes. But if the temples get the control back, then from the temple leadership, how do we ensure that there's no corruption? What safeguards do we put in place there?
See, there are people who are working on draft bills towards this, and some of the discussions that we have had. I mean, there was an actual judge who openly said, when in a conversation, he's a pretty senior judge now, and this person in a conversation said, "Okay, suppose I just take your word for it, and I sign an order, I pass a judgment asking the government to let go of all the government of Tamil Nadu to let go of all the 30,000 temples it's got under its control.
Yeah.
Who steps in? Who's going to take it over?" So there are models that we can look at. There is, for example, the Sikh Shiromani Gurudwara Prabandhak Committee, which has a very good model of how the Gurudwaras and Langars and the Gurudwaras communities' properties are managed.
Yes.
You have the example of, for example, some of the large mega organizations in India. For example, CSI has a means of managing. They have their own internal elections and office bearers and means of putting office bearers in place, means of sacking people who are corrupt. All of these structures are put in place, and it's possible to do them. We can adopt some of the practices from different religions for actually letting the community take over the temple, as well as our own traditional practices where the local community, you would have representatives from each section of community. Let me put it plainly, we'll have representatives from all the major castes in that village. So suppose you have a village is usually dominated by two or three major castes, and there would be one or two other castes which are lesser in number. So you take representatives from all of these castes and put in a rotation system so that you always have representation for all castes on the temple board or the committee. And this structure was already in place in our ancient times, and we can just need to go back and look at our history to how we were managing it as a community.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. Roger Vega, thank you very much for the super chat as well. I appreciate it. That brings us to another very interesting point. And again, I feel like this will be a very, in sort of a mainstream discussion, this becomes a very contentious point, which is, Article 28, which talks about keeping, religious instruction, quote unquote, out of school teaching. And one of the, I think, points that the conference was making and the manifesto of the conference is making, that it is important for, I believe the word here is intergenerational transmission of ancient civilizational knowledge. That is a very interesting discussion as well, because, on the one hand, I think it's very important for, Indians to know what their culture is all about, to get some insights about their culture when they're young, and that's something that they can pass on from generation to generation to generation. It's very, very important. On the other hand, there's the argument that, keep religious education out of schools, and there's a very strong backing of that, and there's a, and I have the belief in the former as well. So I guess the question is, Ratiji, how to sort of bring the two together. We're not necessarily explicitly teaching religious themes, but we're still teaching kids about, certain civilizational values that they need to know and pass on to the next generation.
I'd like to just ask one very small question, which I hope you will be able to answer. Tell me, why do we not have our dates written in any of our wars? Like if you look at Mahabharata or Ramayana, nowhere is the date mentioned. Why is that? It's very simple. It is because what was important was that dharma should be established. The king was not important. The dates were not important. The period was not important. What was important is what was eternal. That is dharma. Even our other teachings, like Sahanavatu that we were talking about earlier, see, it is all leading towards a particular goal. And that goal was that knowledge is always for the betterment of humanity. You pick up any scripture of ours, any ancient scripture of ours, you pick up any Vedas, you pick up anything. it is always talking about knowledge systems. And knowledge systems for what? Not for personal benefit. All these knowledge systems were meant to be used only for humanity. By stopping the people from learning these things, what you have done actually effectively is you have changed our value systems to make it only for people to earn more money. When we talk, like for example, haldi, we were talking about, today, where is the need for the patent to have come into place? Because we presumed that haldi should be used by all and everybody,
right,
for the betterment of your health or whatever. When this came under threat, only that time we opened our eyes and we patented it. Correct? Right. Same with the knowledge systems. What you are doing when you are stopping children from learning about Chanakya, and you are telling them that you should learn, management systems only as, in the Western world, you are stopping your sattvic values from entering the student. That itself is wrong. If you want those sattvic values to come back into our mainstream, you have to allow for the correct scriptures to be taught to the students right from a very small age.
Yeah,
that's what we require.
Yeah, it is a very interesting one, and Ritu, let me ask you as well. Like, how do we ensure as a civilization to maybe get our cultural knowledge into schools to be able to teach that to children? Because I think that's an important part that needs to be taught, but keep maybe explicit religious instruction out of it. That's such a delicate balance to maintain, because sometimes I feel like in India, the two are often interchangeable. Certain civilization values and certain things that we see as a religious maybe tenet, they could be in certain ways I believe interchangeable. So how do we walk that tightrope of getting the civilizational values in there without necessarily trying to getting the claim that we're religiously indoctrinating children? I think you're on mute again there, Ritu.
Saying that before we discuss this, what we really have to discuss is that what exactly the challenges we are facing right now. For instance, because of Article 28, which prohibits the state to teach anything religious, in which even a traditional knowledge base of Upanishad, like Tamso na Jyotir Gamyo, which is a motto of Central School, gets challenged in a PIL in the Supreme Court. I mean, if this is what our society and our civilization, which is traditionally a knowledge-based, Indian civilization has been traditionally a knowledge-based civilization. Smritis, stutis, shrutis, we have learned through phenomenal ways. Our evolution process has been completely knowledge-based. It is not religion. So it is. See, when we talk about religion, we talk about you believe in this God, that's how you're going to get nirvana. You're going to believe in this particular prophet, that's the only way, otherwise you're a kafir. None of our religious texts would actually teach us. This is a very integrated knowledge-based system, which basically speaks about a person's own spiritual journey from within to the divine. Now I think this is where we really focus on it. Even if we talk about our religious books like Gita, like Ramayana or Mahabharata, they are not indoctrinating you to become, I'm really sorry to say, any terrorist, or they are not telling you that you go and kill people. They're not telling you that you have to go and convert. So of course that word propagate doesn't exist in Hinduism. We do not believe in converting people. We believe in accepting people. So if this is what we are going to teach our children, I think we are going to make them much richer. much richer, rather than, but right now our challenges are completely different. Right now we are, here we have a PIL, which is not even a law. Small Upanishad, the mantra, which says from darkness to light.
Yeah.
That's is being talked about as a religious text.
Yeah.
This is one challenge that we really have to face, and we need an amendment in Article 28, wherein we can pass on our knowledge base to our children, which is their right. It is the birthright of every Indian child to receive their ancient knowledge system. If we are not giving it to them, we are actually doing injustice with them.
Yeah, that's fair, I think, as well. And Subodh Malya, thank you very much for the super chat. He says, thanks, Sham. Just wanted to get people talking about how subterfuge and ignorance will wipe out our way of life. And that's absolutely fair. And I think that's why we're having this conversation and the conference as well. And Surenji, let me bring it back to you, because I think, the question of education and what's being taught in schools also comes down to another problem. I think it's connected to another problem, which is the problem that educational institutions that are run by sort of Hindu organizations are facing. I think it's connected to that as well, where the educational organizations that Hindu organizations are running have a lot of restrictions placed upon them and have to abide by a lot of these arbitrary rules and regulations from the central government, which is not something that educational institutions that are run by other religious minorities have to abide by. And so you're in a situation, Surenji, where you're having, you're having communities like the Lingayats say that we want minority status because we just want to be able to run our educational institutions in peace. You have the Ramakrishna Mission's example in the past as well, where they also applied to become a religious minority because the government was interfering so much in how they ran their educational institutions. So to be able to teach our civilizational values and our civilization things in schools, that's another thing that we need to, I think, ensure, is to get the government out of how these Hindu organizations are running their educational institutions, right?
So again, in this context, we have to go back a little back, because
Sure.
again, this is creeping legislation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the original intent was for people who are minorities who need to preserve their unique culture. So if you had a minority, would be, for example, the Tulu community, the Tulu-speaking community in the west coast of Karnataka. They are restricted to just a few districts of Karnataka, and they are surrounded all around by Kannada speakers, and they are surrounded in the larger Indian context by Hindi and Tamil speakers and all these speakers. It's for the purpose of them being able to establish and run their institutions, so that they can run institutions which will give instruction in specific language or something, so that their unique character can be preserved. The same thing was applied for certain Christians and certain Muslim denominations also. For example, the Dawoodi Bohra community, which is small, which has a unique culture, for the purpose of protecting them so that they can preserve their culture. This safeguard was initially placed in Article 30 and to some extent in Article 29. Then this just became an right. Then it became, from a defensive right, it became an aggression, tool of aggression, when they said that you will restrict this particular right only to the minorities. Therefore, we will restrict these only to linguistic and religious minorities. It must be noted here that it's also applicable to linguistic minorities for running educational institutions. So the funny twist is that if you are a Telugu, and a friend of mine calls it the Right to Educate Act, not the Right to Education Act. It doesn't really empower the kids who are learning, but it's empowering the people who are providing the education. So the thing is that if you have a Telugu person who is resident in Chittoor in Andhra Pradesh, he does not have the rights that a Tamil person who runs an educational institute in Chittoor has. If he just travels 50 kilometers and comes into the Tamil Nadu border, he becomes a linguistic minority, he or she, and he can run an institution which is very much to a large extent, free of the interference from the state in terms of regulations and so on. Now, this was some of the provisos that were being were challenged in the TMA Pai judgment, TMA Pai case, and it was ruled that TMA Pi would get certain freedoms to run their educational institutions the way they wanted to, on par with the minorities, which is where Article 15.5 was inserted pretty recently, just about 10, 12 years ago, through the 93rd Amendment. And it was inserted specifically to immunize the minorities from certain provisions of the Constitution, which would give the state pretty wide, wide leeway in interfering how educational institutions were going to be run. So what we are seeking is basically the abrogation of Article 15.5 and certain changes in the Article 29 and 30, so that it doesn't restrict these rights and freedoms only to minority, but gives the rights and freedoms to all sections of society, which should include everybody. So, if Shambhav and I decided that we are YouTubers, and as YouTubers, we have the right to start an institution to teach kids to run podcasts on YouTube, we have a right to do it with the same set of restrictions that anybody else would have.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's the principle behind our Constitution, right? Is to ensure equal rights for all, make sure that everybody is equal in the eyes of the law. And when you have different standards for different communities, you create situations like the ones we're seeing with educational institutions particularly. You create situations which creates unnecessary divisions within Indian society, where communities within Hindu society have to feel like they have to apply to become a different religion, a minority religion, to be able to just maintain their affairs without necessarily the government getting its hand in there. So I think that's also very interesting because that's something that this is something where the courts have, I believe, I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but looking at the manifesto, I think there was something about, there was a court decision in there also where the courts had spoken up against the unnecessary government intervention in managing Hindu bodies as well, Ratiji, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, even recently there was a court ruling like that. Actually, I just realized one thing that we've not spoken about. The meaning of the word secular itself means that the government should not interfere with any religious activity or with anything to do with religion. Whereas we have come to a case where the government is interfering in practically everything related to the Hindu religion. And that is what we need to fight against, actually, if we really want to be a secular society.
Yeah, that's fair as well. There's a question that somebody asked me, I believe, when I said that I was going to be doing this podcast, and I'm not sure who would be able to answer this best, but they were asking if there's going to be a discussion on the Uniform Civil Code at all during the conference.
None.
Okay. No, I understand, because I feel like I feel like the Uniform Civil Code is such a thing that it's a discussion for a whole different it'll take up a whole conference on its own.
Yes. It needs more importance on its own rather than be clubbed with something else.
Yeah, because I think the issues that we're discussing in today's podcast, and I feel like the issue that are going to be discussed in the conference as well on the 21st, those are all building blocks in my opinion towards getting to the Uniform Civil Code. That's how you get to it. You take out the hindrances that are present in the Constitution to getting to that Uniform Civil Code. So I think it's a house that as they say will need to be built, brick by brick. So let me just finish up by asking if you could give us Rituji, if you could give us some details about some guests and people that are going to be attending the conference. If you could divulge some details about that.
Okay, so we have a list of very good panelists with us. We have people like Kapil Mishra, who's an elected MLA. We have people like Sirsaji, who would be talking on conversions. Kapil will be discussing Article 27 along with me. Then we have, let me just quickly, in fact, give you some names here.
We'll be having Mr. R.K. Ori, who wrote the book on, who literally wrote the book on sectarian spending in the how sectarian spending works in the government. community with scholarships and subsidies directed only towards minorities. He's written a book on it. He's a very senior bureaucrat who's now retired. We have Mr. Rajiv Srinivasan.
We have Dr. J.K. Bajaj also, who's working on demographics. Yeah. Then we have Madhu Kishwarji with us, who will also be there with us. We have Jaideep A. Prabhu, we have Padma Pillai, Abhijit Bhatar, Maria Vart. Then we have Tapan Ghosh, Ratan Sharda ji, Hari Prasad ji, Suren ji is with us, Rati ji is with us. Then we have Shilpa Nair, T.R. Ramesh, Vimal Nair ji, who's doing temples, Amendra Ratnu, RVS Mani. We have Jaggi ji coming and joining us, discussing our 97 guests.
And you left out Konrad Elst. Dr. Konrad Elst is flying in from Belgium. He's flying in from Belgium for this conference.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
So topic 6, he'll be discussing on fragmentation of Hindu society by denying Hindus the right to administer their own educational institutions without undue state interference.
Right.
So that's the panel which is being moderated by Arihant.
Okay. Oh, that's fantastic. So it's as you guys can see, it's a pretty stacked panel. There's going to be some fantastic discussion. So if you're in Delhi around that time, I would encourage attending the conference. So do people need tickets to get in?
No. We have a registration form.
Okay.
Which we will share. We'll even put it live, and they can register for the event. It's absolutely free of cost.
Okay. And where can they go and register for the event?
There is a form which we'll put it live on Twitter soon.
Okay.
And we'll share it with you also. You can also put it for us on your channel.
Okay, I'll add the registration link in the description, guys, right after this episode. So keep an eye out for that. And if you're in Delhi, I would highly encourage attending the event. You'll be able to hear some really fantastic people and have some be able to listen to some very important discussions, I believe. And finally, let me ask all three of you, I'll start with Ratiji and I'll go around. How optimistic are you about, enacting at least some kind of changes or helping the constitution become at least a little more equitable? I would say, before Article 370, I would say my optimism was very middling. But I think after something like that, you kind of think to yourself, probably the sky's the limit. So in there, between a 1 to 10, how optimistic are you?
I'd say 7, because I know one thing that will happen, that after this conference, more and more people will become very much aware about what exactly is the problem. And awareness also spreads this intention to rectify the situation. And when people together want to rectify a situation, the government has to bend to it.
Yeah. Rituji, how about yourself?
So, I'm primarily a very optimistic person by nature, so I'm going to give it 8. Okay. Also because I feel there is a big buzz. There may be a conversion bill coming up in November. And then, of course, Citizen Amendment Bill is a part of the BJP manifesto. So we are very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that this time we are going to really look at very good changes. Some radical changes are going to come. And giving, we are not against anybody out here, but we just want equal rights for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Surenji, how about yourself?
I'm very confident that this will eventually get tabled and we'll open it up for discussion. Because in the 2000, a couple of years ago, Dr. Satyapal Singh had tabled a bill which specifically spoke about Articles 25 to 30. And this is just taking on Dr. Satyapal Singh's bill and building on top of it. So we are quite confident that it will get tabled, if not this winter session, by the summer session of Lok Sabha. It ought to get tabled. And I'm confident that there will be a lot of discussion around these topics that we are speaking about in the next 6 months to 1 year. And we are very hopeful that the legislation will be passed before this administration is out.
Oh, terrific. Rituji, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of our mentors have asked me to read this out, which I'm going to do so. Okay. He says that I must say that no effort, however small, goes waste. So we are confident of constitutional changes.
All right, terrific. No, that's great to hear. That kind of optimism is always great to hear. There's a final super chat here from Alok Dubey. Says we should fight for the availability Sanskrit education as a tool as well as a connecting language. There's been a lot of debate over quote unquote Hindi imposition and stuff like that, and I think this is an actually interesting way around it, Alok. And um, uh, I wonder what you guys think about Sanskrit as a sort of connecting language for India, Ratiji. I wonder.
Actually, whenever anybody talks about the Aryan invasion theory, I laugh because I feel, why don't they just realize that Sanskrit was always there, right from the Himalayas, right up to the Indian Ocean, and everywhere that was the language which connected people through and through,
Yeah.
wherever the Hindu Samskriti went. So obviously, we would like it to come back into our lives and become the mode of communication again between
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, I think so as well. One of the biggest, I think, arguments that people tend to make against Sanskrit is, oh, it's a dead language, nobody speaks it. A, that's not true. And secondly,
That's
I
not
mean,
true.
you look at the example of Hebrew. Hebrew was primarily a religious language. They was only used for religious texts and religious ceremonies. But now look at the way it has been mainstreamed in Israel. And people speak it freely in Israel, openly in Israel. So it's not something that if we have the sort of if we have the intention to create a connecting language, I think that's something that can very easily be revived. I was wondering if you were going to say something, Surenji.
See, Sanskrit as a link language is not a new thing. Sanskrit actually lives on in a lot of the regional dialects and languages of India. So if I say Jalam, it automatically you understand it's Jal. If I say, for example,
Vriksha.
Tapas, Vriksha, Jalam, these are across India, these are in use in languages. So it is a more natural link language in terms of, and it was always the language of discourse. If you had somebody who wanted to discuss the finer point of grammar, or who wanted to discuss a finer point of prose, or if you wanted to discuss a finer point in medicine, the common link language from someone in Bengal with someone in Maharashtra was Sanskrit.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very natural choice as a link language. And I'm sure most of us are here know that it was Dr. Ambedkar at the time of the Constituent Assembly debates had actually brought up the idea of using Sanskrit as a link language, the way Hebrew was being spoken of in Israel at the same time, roughly at the same time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with that idea. I think it's a terrific idea. I think that's something that the current opposition some people have to Hindi, which is completely understandable, that may not be with a language like Sanskrit. So I think that's a very good idea to create a link language with a language like Sanskrit. But other than that, guys, again, thank you for taking the time out and doing the show today. I think
you.
it was very enlightening and people got an idea of what the conference is about. And again, I urge people that are in the area on the 21st to go attend it. There's some fantastic speakers, as you heard, and some great discussions. And there's a feeling of great optimism in general as well. So I think it'll be a great event to go see live. Guys, again, I will share. So there's going to be a live link, you said, Rituji, soon, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll make sure to share that live link in the description as well, so you guys can just click on it and register and go attend the event. Other than that, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to share it if you think this is an event that other people, your friends, your family, people that you know, people that you work with would like to attend as well. Share this episode with them. It'll give them a primer on what the conference is going to be all about. So do that. And other than that, guys, again, thank you, Ratiji, Rituji, and Surenji for taking the time out today.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Namaste.
Namaste. Thanks again, guys. All right. We will see you next time. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys soon.